Welcome, everyone. Please tell me if you guys can hear me. Um, Unfortunately, Mike ran into some sound issues, and he's trying to figure out how to get his stuff to work. Uh, Always seems like we get tech issues right before going on, um, but hopefully we can get that figured out and come on next time. But I thought that I would just come on and do probably a short Q&A if anybody has any questions. Uh, I think this is probably episode 45. Sounds crazy. It feels like yesterday that we started this. Um, and I think we're about 6 or 7 away from 1,000 subscribers, which I'm really proud of and really happy and kind of amazed that we managed to get this far in such a short period of time. So thank you, everyone here, for following us and checking out what we're doing. Um, so yeah, I'm just kind of winging it at the moment. We had planned to talk about the Eucharist miracles. I had that topic. A few Christians brought that up to me. And we're going to discuss that for a little bit, but I'm going to shelf that for now until I can do a show with Mike again, which hopefully will be maybe tomorrow or the day after, as soon as he gets his stuff figured out. But until then, I figured might as well just do a Q&A and answer some questions from you guys and kind of give something back to you guys. A few pieces of news, real quick. The first is that our Patreon should be up probably by tonight or tomorrow. I finished the page. I just have to get it double checked to make sure that everyone agrees with what I put down there. And so that should be up, like I said, either tonight or tomorrow. And I'll post a link in the description. And the following one's coming up. So, and then outside of that, if you guys saw the last video, I may be doing a response. We had Professor Alex. I can't remember his last name, but it was quite an interesting conversation. Yeah, I wanted to address that. I'll probably do a video breakdown of it. Right. I think Alex Sitch. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't want to mispronounce his name, but hopefully we'll have him back on. I felt that my questions weren't quite addressed in a way that I don't know if maybe I was misunderstanding him, because sometimes it's easy to speak past one another. But I didn't really get an understanding of why it is that any of us should trust or accept Aristotelian metaphysics. And so hopefully that you can come back on and clarify that in your future. I'm going to plug my computer real quick. Okay. But in the meantime, if any of you guys have any questions and anything that you want answered, I can try to do that. Um, I know that this was kind of a last minute thing because what we're going to discuss we weren't really able to get to because of tech issues. Um, but yeah, if any of you want anything discussed, just let me know. And you can always email us at axiomsontrial@gmail.com. We're still trying to figure out who the next guest is. I may be bringing Pastor Brian back on, who we had some episodes back. And he was a really nice guy. We had a fruitful and interesting conversation. Although I realized, looking back, that we were defining some terms differently. And so, to some degree, we're talking past each other. And so, I want to bring him back on to sort of clarify some issues there. Zachariah says, it is Pride Month. It doesn't make sense to me to be proud of an innate identity that I didn't choose. I would say that the reason why Pride matters, because I agree, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be proud of things that we didn't author. That kind of seems to be anything. But the reason for pride there, I think, points more to kind of fighting back against the notions there's something wrong with, we shouldn't feel shame for who we are. And so it's kind of a response to that. It's, if you're told your whole life is that there's something that's sinful and something to feel shame for, the way to combat that is to say, fuck you, I'm going to take pride in who I am and not hide it. I think that's my understanding of that perspective. But yeah. But yeah, hopefully next time be able to actually talk about the Eucharistic miracles. That's something that I've been wanting to tackle for a little while. Are there any big thematic differences between Western and Eastern philosophers? I would say yes. Both thematic differences and differences in style, in the way that the philosophies are expressed. Western philosophy, to a large extent, is focused on the idea of the individual, while Eastern philosophy tends to undo that notion, decentralize this idea that there is an individual experience in the world, and rather that this idea of the self is kind of an illusion. So I would say that is quite a difference there. And I think, from memory serves me right, in Eastern philosophy, there's much more use of metaphor and symbolism, much more so than the more analytic tradition of the West. Yes, there's obviously continental philosophy from the West too, but it's a little bit of a different type of flavor, I guess. But I mean, there's a lot more that could be said there. But if you're just tuning in now, I'm just doing a quick Q&A, kind of as a last minute resort, because there were some tech issues. When are you guys going to hand a blow to flat earthers? Yeah, I know that Mike, my lovely co-host, would love to do that. I never really thought about it because it's such a ridiculous perspective that for me it's not something that I even consider be worth getting into. But I guess we should deal with all kinds of ideas, as ridiculous as they are. So I'm sure we'll get to that at some point, maybe even soon. I'll talk to Mike and see uh, what he would like to address that. That might be a fun episode. It's kind of amazing to me that is even a position. This day and age, there are still people who think that flat Earth is a thing. I always wonder what they would say if we rounded them up and took them on a rocket to just see the globe from space. 5% of the population believes it. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that just speaks to how detached from reality some people can be. People will believe anything just in order to think they're kind of against the grain, and I think it's kind of a way to be oppositional just for the sake of being oppositional. It's very strange to me that anybody can take that perspective seriously. But I don't know. It never made sense to me at all. But yeah, I guess I'll say a couple of things just real quick in relation to the last episode. From my perspective, if you're going to claim that there are other tools to arrive at knowledge other than science, you have to provide a methodology. It doesn't have to be science if there is some other way, but some way to show why the things you claim aren't just imaginary. Alex kept saying that we clearly observe time, we clearly observe order. Can you explain what Dr. Sitch's worldview is? I don't know that I can. My understanding is that he takes Aristotelian view to physics, and that he thinks there is something special about humans in the way that we can reason that is better explained not just as a process of evolution, but by the fact that we're made in the image of God, and therefore we can do something that other animals can't. And the science, can explain the function of certain things, but can't define what time is, it can't define what space is, it can't define what causality is. And that what defines these things is philosophy. And I can even agree that the science can't get clear definitions in some of this stuff. But where science fails, philosophy doesn't succeed. It's certainly not theology. And I feel like a lot of people hide behind metaphysics. They say, well, you shouldn't approach this. Yeah, I mean, essentially it's Thomism. He takes a Thomist perspective. And I understand that he didn't want to provide sound bites, and a lot of these things require kind of an extended reading and doing a lot of work on multiple levels. But you got to start somewhere. Like, if you can't provide at least the beginning of your worldview as to why it is, other than just saying it makes the most sense to me, to scoff at the notion that causality is emergent from physics isn't an argument. If he has an argument against why we should reject the way in which current physics looks at these issues, then he should provide that. But I didn't feel like that was done, and I didn't feel like the justification was given as to why the Thomist perspective was obviously true, which is, I mean, there's nothing obvious in philosophy as far as I'm concerned. To me, we've been still emailing back and forth, and one of the things he said in one of the emails was that for him, engaging in philosophy is essentially abandoning atheism. And to me, it's the other way around. To me, it's engaging in philosophy is doing away with the assumptions that we have about the world. And these assumptions include things like, taking the self for granted, taking reality for granted as we see it. taking things like causality and time as self-evident. None of this is self-evident. It's much more complex and nuanced than I think Professor Sitch wants to realize. That's the other things. I didn't propose this. He said that it's wrong to say laws of physics govern the behavior of objects. Yeah, I didn't understand what he meant by that. The same way that I didn't understand what he meant by saying we observe things in order, but not order itself. Yet order, he said that science can't talk about order because it can't weigh order like you can in a lab, and yet we observe things in order. So there's like ordered objects, and then there's this other thing called order that he thinks still exists. Don't know what that means. From my perspective, order is simply a description of the relationship among objects. So there's not some other thing called order. Hopefully I'm not misunderstanding or misinterpreting or mischaracterizing his perspective, but frankly, I didn't really understand what he was trying to say. I'm hoping that we can have him back on perhaps at some point, and we are emailing back and forth, and I have some things that I want to bring up in private with him and on that issue, because certainly my rejection of Thomism has nothing to do with my department not taking ancient philosophy seriously. Some of my favorite classes from my undergrad were ancient philosophy classes, and he seemed to suggest that maybe it was my department was kind of a fault of some kind of bias or historicism. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. Like I said, they take ancient philosophy very seriously. But I've read enough philosophy at this point in my life to recognize, at least as I see it, that philosophy, while important and useful in certain regards, and certainly influential, it's outdated, and I don't take it seriously in the sense that I don't think provides us with true information about the way the reality is. So, I appreciate that. I try to remain respectful in these conversations. I want to create an environment where I find common ground with people who see the world differently than I do, but we try to find the humanity between us and the other. It becomes difficult at times. We had a while back, several episodes back, we had a couple of Muslims on the show, and it's hard for me to remain respectful when they're making excuses for slavery and pedophilia and violence, general violence. There's like a line that to me gets crossed where now I can't really remain respectful anymore. But I try. I don't always succeed. Can you explain Thomism? I wish I could. We'll have an in-depth video on Thomism in the near future. We address some of it in one video where we talk about the 5 proofs, St. Thomas Aquinas, and 5 proofs. And we had David, the cosmologist, on to deal with some of that. But often Thomists can't explain Thomism. There's one, probably the most famous Thomist writer, I think his name is Fraser, has an argument with something like, I think it's like 70 something premises. It's like, there's just something there that seems off to me. The general idea is that everything requires, everything that isn't necessary, that is contingent, requires a cause. And so for things to come into motion, something else must have put them in motion. And somehow this gets to there having to be one thing that is not caused by something else, that is a necessary foundation by which all other things stem from. And that, of course, according to them, is God. And then they try to argue that it has to be a mind. And to me, it's just one leap after the other that has no relevance to reality. Kind of like there are similarities with the Kalam, but I think it's a bit different. It's not something that I'm too familiar with. It's something that I definitely want to address in detail. And we're thinking of having more Thomist. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I was hoping that Alex would get into when he came on, was why he finds Thomism so credible. But he felt that it would require too much time. When you mentioned pedophilia, do you think an attraction to children deserves punishment, or only the act of child abuse? I think the act. I think the attraction. Anybody who's dealing with that should immediately seek help and try to get help. Just thoughts, I don't think, are deserving of prison time or punishment in that regard. But certainly, social structures to make sure that kids are kept safe. I don't think it's something that should be taken lightly. So it's definitely something that's always a problem. But yeah, we'll get to the Thomism in the near future. Thanks again for coming on, guys. I know this is kind of last minute. I don't have anything particularly prepared. Just kind of winging it for the time being. Any other questions? Yeah, it's true. There are a lot of urges that humans have that are immoral. I would say that we also have instincts that are moral, and sometimes it's hard to find how do I say this? It's hard to do the right thing sometimes. I'm not a professor yet. I'm hoping to become one at some point. I'm currently finishing up my master's degree in philosophy, and we'll seek teaching jobs afterwards. I was a substitute teacher for about 6 or 7 months at a high school before I moved, and that was very strange. It wasn't for philosophy. I was just a sub for any kind of class. And, I definitely, if I teach, I want it to be at a college level, because high school is a nightmare. Hopefully, a little bit of everything. I'll teach a bit of everything. My main interest currently is something called phenomenology, which is about can we talk about subjective experience in objective terms, particularly the idea of consciousness and what does it mean to be a subject in relation to objects and that kind of thing. But philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, existentialism, all these things are things I'm very interested in and would love to teach. Zachariah asks, will any of your YouTube videos be part of your master's thesis? No, I don't think so. My thesis currently is on something called postmodernism, which basically looks at the notion of truth as a social construction. And I'm doing a critique of that perspective. It basically looks at all of reality, or what we say about reality, as something called meta-narratives. In other words, um, rather than these things being uh, independently true, they arise out of culture, and they are constructed through culture. Um, and I, even domains like science, under that lens, are viewed as not a pathway to truth in any real sense, but just another kind of cultural projection of sorts. And I think that perspective is ultimately self-defeating, because how are we to take uh, the postmodern claim that there's no such thing as absolute truth, and that all these things are socially constructed? Because that sentence itself, in turn, would be a social construction. And so I think the whole project is ultimately self-defeating. And I'm looking to hopefully be done my thesis in a month and a half. Um, After which I will defend my thesis and finally graduate. Uh, I don't know if I'm going into a PhD program or anything like that. Perhaps later on. Kristen asks, I've been listening to a Sam Harris podcast on free will. What is your position on that? I tend to agree with Harris. Um, I would love for free will to be a thing. I've been trying to find a good argument for it for probably 13 years, and I haven't been able to find a convincing argument for free will. I know that there are some approaches that try to somehow, I think they're called compatibilists, where they try to say that somehow determinism and freedom of choice is still compatible. I think they're just begging the question. I never found that perspective interesting. So I begrudgingly tend to agree with Sam Harris that free will is mostly, I think, an illusion currently. I would love to start a philosophy course online. I appreciate that. If I ever get to the point, I will let you guys know. And like I said, we'll have a Patreon up and running in a couple of days, and perhaps maybe I'll do that. I'll host some classes on there for anything that you guys are interested in, and I could do some tutoring that way for a tiny fee. If I remember correctly, the way we're having set up is that the first tier of the Patreon will be $5, the second will be $10, and the third will be $15. And for each tier, we have more rewards, or like, will I publish my thesis when it's ready for us to see? Yeah, maybe. I haven't thought about it. I guess I could. If you guys are interested in that, yeah, why not? I think I could probably do that. I don't think it's particularly interesting, to be honest. I chose it because my frustration with postmodernism is high enough that I felt I could write a lot about it. But I think there are far more interesting conversations in philosophy to be had. It's just that I felt that one was probably an easier route to take as far as how much content I could put out. I do want to write something in the realm of phenomenology, talking about the difference in the way in which a dissociative person experiences the world in comparison to someone who doesn't suffer from dissociative disorder. In what way do their senses and day-to-day perception of the world change based on that? So that's something that I would like to do at some point. That would be, I think, interesting, and something that hasn't really been discussed very much. Anytime you can find something in philosophy that hasn't been addressed, it's like finding gold. It's so rare because so much of the stuff has been talked about and upside down, turned upside down, addressed on all kinds of perspectives. Do I think science is the only way to knowledge? I think, obviously there are things like logical truths that are kind of self-evident by definition. We can talk about truths in that sense. I don't even really claim that science can give us certainty. I think science can provide falsifiable working models that are the most supported and the most reasonable to believe in, due to their explanatory power and predictive power. But I don't think that science can provide us with certainty about ontology. It's more dealing with trying to understand the appearance of the way things seem to be. For all I know, my reality could still be a dream or Descartes' demon, or it could be a brain in a vat. None of these claims I actually believe in. Obviously, you have to actually provide an argument more so than a mere possibility. But I don't think science can provide us with certainty, just with what seems to work. But where science fails, everything else fails far harder. I don't think there's any question of science doesn't answer that religion answers better. I think religion fails on every regard, and that would be my perspective on it. I think science is the best we have, but yeah. So, this is definitely going to be a shorter episode here, given that I'm by myself. And, all the tech issues that we're having, I didn't get. We started I started an hour later than what I was hoping to get on here. Does religion do worse on the issue of God compared to science? Yeah, of course. Religion has no methodology to provide to separate the imaginary from the actual. It makes claims, but it makes claims that it can't support. It makes claims that it can't justify. So it's not enough to just have a post hoc explanation for some facts. You need to be able to provide predictions that then you can verify. Because we can all come up with different narratives to explain a set of facts. Just how do we choose one metaphysics as opposed to another? How do we say that one religion is right over another? You can't do that because they're all operating on basically the same tool, which is this idea of faith. And so, yeah, it's I'm not in principle against God or religion. One talking point you often hear from theists is that atheists are just atheists because they don't want to believe, or they want to sin, or this and that. It's all nonsense. I'm an atheist because I haven't seen any convincing evidence to the contrary. If someone could provide evidence that made sense to me for God, then I would convert, and I would have no problem doing so. Just that nobody has ever been able to do this. And all the arguments I've seen up until this point have all been fallacious in one form or another, or just leaps that don't logically follow. So that's my perspective currently. Okay. And yeah, so Tangelo is joining us. He says that he doesn't believe me and that I suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Well, you're entitled to believe that. It doesn't change the reality. I would say the same thing. I think you suppress the truth out of wishful thinking, and you have the way you want the world to be, and so you reject the evidence and you make up your own evidence. That's what I see from theists. That's largely what I saw from you in our conversations. And ultimately, I don't think you understand the science you talk about, and what you posted was just quotes taken out of context of issues that you didn't understand. But but that's fine. I mean, we're all entitled to believe what we wish. Otanjo says that I utterly fail to substantiate naturalism. We've addressed this before. I think I don't claim to have access to ontology, methodological naturalism. I think that is the best we have, and I think it's the most reasonable inferred ontology given the tools that we have. You have failed to substantiate your theism outside of what is purely imaginary. You just made claims that you can support, and that's as far as that's ever gone. And you've had your misconceptions about science explained to you in detail time and time again, but you can't, when you don't want to believe something, no amount of evidence can show you to the contrary. And that's okay. It is what it is. Ultimately, it's what can be done. I have no issue in principle with the idea of God. I'm not angry. I don't have a past of religious trauma that I'm rebelling against. I've always been an atheist, pretty much. As soon as I could start to think about these things. So Sandra says, can codified information emerge from absences? This has been explained to you already. The way in which you define the stuff as information and intent in that information, nobody in science outside of a couple of lunatics believe that to be the same kind of information. So it's not information. It's not designed. These are not biological. What's the term you used? Can you remember now? Farms? No, not farms. Machines or any of the sort. The consensus is quite clear in this. And what you have are confusions and misconceptions about science. It is what it is. I have nothing personally against you. I'm just stating as I see it. It doesn't bother me that you believe what you believe. It just is what it is. Good evening, Pessimistic Idealism. Welcome. This is a shorter show. I don't know if you just came in. I'm just doing a quick Q&A. We had some tech issues earlier, and Mike wasn't able to join us tonight. So I'm just doing a kind of improv thing real quick, answer some questions. I'll probably end this stream in about 20-25 minutes, make it to an hour or so. But hopefully, we can go back to the regular schedule in the near future. We've been preparing some notes about idealism, about Thomism, about some other issues. So thank you everyone for your patience. I hope that you've all been enjoying our content. I know we're the best at advertising, and definitely a lot of topics that we want to address that I've been wanting to address for a while that we haven't really gotten the chance to do so yet, for one reason or another. But when we do tackle idealism, you'll be the first one to know. My favorite painting? That's an interesting question. I don't know. I like a lot of Monet. Van Gogh. Uh, it's hard. I don't think I have a favorite. I mean, I love art, but I'm not particularly knowledgeable um, in it. Right? My mother is an artist. She's the one to ask about kind of the history of it. For a painting, I don't know that I have one. Um, yeah, I would have to think about that. Um, I like a lot of art, um, but yeah, I don't know. I've done some painting here and there, but nothing particularly uh, impressive. Just some watercolor type of stuff. Yeah, I don't know that I have a favorite. Uh, I mean, it's a cheesy answer, but I like Starry Night. Uh, but who knows? I'm just not too knowledgeable about art. I'm more of a music person, to be honest. Music has definitely been more my passion. Although I am making a board game, and I did a lot of the art for that. It's kind of like fantasy characters, D&D type of thing. Do I like abstract paintings or do I like realistic? I tend to prefer realistic or impressionist. Um, Maybe even impressionist art more than pure abstract. Um, a pure abstract doesn't quite do it for me. Um, my favorite music genre. That's also a difficult question because I like a bit of everything outside of like modern country and like super screaming metal or something. Like I can't really handle that type of thing. But old school country, jazz, blues, rock, um, all even opera. I like um, a lot of Italian opera. In fact, a really close friend of mine is an opera singer. He's incredibly talented. Um, Probably my favorite band, the reason why I became a musician to begin with, was Pink Floyd. A lot of the music I play is like ambient, the synth layering of sound. Another musician I like, his name is his music name is Illuvian, and he plays a lot of ambient and kind of meditation type of music. Um, but yeah, uh, I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place with music. Like I like a little bit of. I mean, I know it's kind of a cop out answer, but I like a little bit of everything. Um, so- but I used to hate opera, and now again I couldn't tell you names, right? Like I couldn't. I'm not very educated on the history, but when I hear it, I love it. And you can never go wrong with jazz too. Like I just love that kind of thing. Um, but that's another thing I would like to get back into once I'm done with school. Is get back into music a little bit. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. I know that it's kind of like a in the moment sort of moment type of thing. I don't know how interesting this is to anyone, but yeah, Chris and I love Pink Floyd. Um, that's the one band where like if I hear any of their songs after like a few seconds, I know what album it was on, what song it was. Thank you, Ada. Take care. I'll see you next time. I appreciate you coming in. Jacob asks, "How might a God being resolved? No, how might a God being resolve the problem of free will than not having it?" Yeah, I don't think I never really understood how um, God would resolve the problem of free will. Um, I don't even if you were to say that God, is outside of space and time, and thus the events that God observes aren't caused by God, I still don't see where the free will arises. It's just something that doesn't make sense to me. Maybe someday a theist will be able to make it clear to me. It seems to me that if anything, with a God, it's even more problematic, because then we have, at that point, we don't have our own meaning anymore. Our meaning is to serve the God that brought us into existence. So now we have, if we had little choice before, now we have even less choice. Because we don't choose the circumstances that we are a part of. We don't choose what will lead us to hell or heaven. We don't choose those things being consequences to begin with, which is why someone like Hitchens calls it a celestial North Korea, because there's something intrinsically dictator-like about it seems to me. But I don't know. I hope you're all doing well tonight, wherever you are. Thank you for taking your time to come in and join me here tonight. Hopefully, Mike will be able to come back next time around. Any other questions for me? As far as potential future guests, we'll be having definitely more theists on. I've been in conversation with a Muslim who wanted to come on. Oh, Zachariah, I will have a Patreon. We will have a Patreon in the next couple of days. I basically finished it. I just need Mike to double check it to make sure that he's happy with what I made. And once he's looked at it, then we can publish it. So it will probably be up probably tomorrow, maybe the day after, something like that. So it's, and I think also we're about 7 subs away from 1,000, which is mind-boggling to me. So I really appreciate you becoming a Patreon once that's out. So, let's see. What's the next? Under materialism, do you think the love is still meaningful if it is simply the result of chemical interaction instead of being a thing like a platonic apple? Yeah, absolutely. I think the mechanistic explanation of what love is doesn't take anything away from the experience. Like, it's just a different description on an ontological level. Like, I still, even if love is caused under certain deterministic paradigm, it doesn't change anything about the joy that comes from it, the value that I attribute to it, and the fact that I seek it. So to me, I never really understood the connection between meaning and like why materialism would lead to a lack of meaning. I think it's a different question. It's independent of it. I can be completely determined and have that meaning be determined under materialism. Yeah, so that's what I would say. I hope I answered your question properly. But yeah, I just don't see the idea of things being chemical interactions as taking anything away from why we should value those things. I would find it valuable regardless. But yeah, we do this for maybe 10, 15 more minutes. Call it a night for the time being. I'm glad that we have some people here to listen to me ramble about. But let's see. This shows that when we look at someone we're deeply in love with, we do not think that I have X amount of oxytocin in my brain for this person. Yeah, of course not. And that's kind of the thing why I said, these are languages that apply to different ontological levels. Like, when I kick if I kick a soccer ball, I'm not thinking when I'm kicking it that it's a combination of atoms. That's what it is, right? Like there are. The issue is how deep do we want to get about the ontology? What is emergent and what isn't? But I don't think the purely mechanistic description of love takes anything away from the experience. Like, yeah, it may be the case that when I'm in love with someone, X chemical gets released, but the experience is still the experience. The value I find is still the value. How we explain the phenomena doesn't take anything away from the quality I experience of the phenomena. There seems to me to be a different issue. But you're right. We don't think about our daily lives in purely those terms. And why would we? I think there are reasons why, on a basic level, we have more surface notions. But that's not. I don't think it's a problem. And yeah, that's the other thing is, we can ascribe any mechanistic description we want, but there's always a distance between the description and the thing itself. The experience is still going to be the experience, and no amount of description is ever going to fully capture that experience. Now, to me, I'm still a materialist. I still think that ultimately things are ontologically material. Yes, materialism is reductionist, I would say, but I guess I would define myself as a non-reductive materialist, meaning I think that everything that exists is material, but I don't think that the description can fully capture experience. Not because experience is ontologically different than material, but because it is a fact of and a limitation of our subjectivity that results in this gap between the description and the thing itself. Let me see this question. Do you think that normativity is an emergent phenomenon that is incapable of being captured by any kind of reductive explanation? I think that all phenomena cannot be fully captured by an explanation. So this goes back to the famous paper called "What's It Like to Be a Bat," whose name escapes me at the moment. Can't remember who wrote it. I'm having a brain fart. I think Nagel, I believe. Either way, where he talks about how we can learn all the inner workings of a bat, and it will still not provide us with its subjective experience. Another famous example is Mary's Room, where a colorblind person can learn about sort of the physical facts of a color. But none of that will ever provide a colorblind person with the experience of what it's like to look at red. I agree with that. But the mistake people make from those observations is that therefore there is something ontologically different about experience that is somehow non-physical. And I think that's an error. I think it's a linguistic error. I think experience comes first, but there's no reason to assume that experience is non-physical. It's just that, again, there is a gap between the description and the thing itself, but it's all physical. What do I think about the principle of sufficient reason, as I'm hearing more and more that some reject it? I'm not sure what I think about it, to be honest. I have to do a little bit more thinking about that. The more time goes by, and the more uncomfortable I am with pure intuitions. I would have to think about that a little more. I mean, how do you understand that to be? Like, the thing is, I've also I've had that be defined differently to me by a number of people. So I'm not even sure that everybody agrees with what it actually stands for. So I want to make sure that I'm dealing with how you're defining it particularly. Hey, Deadpool, good to see you. You should come on sometime. I would love to have you as a guest. I love your content, Captain. Yeah, so how do you deal with brute fact? I struggle with this idea of contingency and brute facts. It seems to me that already, by making those distinctions, we are assuming more about our access to ontology than we have the right to assume. Even if there was such a thing, yes, Captain Epstein. Even if there was such a thing, how would we know what really was ultimately contingent in the way that it's expressed? I don't know. It's just maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but I never found those approaches convincing. Do you think that Mary will be able to identify red apples red and not as blue or orange after leaving the black and white room? No, I don't think Mary could have, if she remains colorblind, there is no way for her to identify any of that with certainty. Because even if we can all compare, okay, here are the physical descriptions of redness, we can never be sure that for some reason our experience might not be different. Now, it seems unlikely that it will be different. But it's to some degree the problem of other minds, right? Many atheists have a problem with religious presuppositions. They are indeed extreme in their view, but do you agree that we all have to presuppose certain things in order to function in life? No, I don't agree that we have to presuppose anything. And I do find the presuppositionalists to be kind of on the lowest level of intellectual rigor there. The thing is, I'm not presupposing, for example, the tools of logic. I'm using them and recognizing that they work. Science doesn't presuppose anything. Science works because it's able to make certain kinds of observations with sort of a pattern that is repeatable. But it doesn't presuppose order. It observes it where it exists. I'm not saying that necessarily we only function with mere empiricism. Although I personally tend to lean on the side of the empiricist. I guess maybe elaborate on that. I would say that most of my beliefs are not things that I am certain of. Like, I can't be certain of an external world. I just think that it's the most reasonable explanation given my circumstance. I think other possibilities explain less and not as well. But I'm not certain, or I don't presuppose the external world. I believe it because I think that's where the evidence points to. Now, the one thing that I am certain of is that regardless of my ontology, that I exist. Because I can't think and not exist. That's, Descartes' cogito, right? And some people have tried to say that we still have to assume language, but I think that's an error there. They're confusing the expression with what is existentially true about the cogito, which is just a fact about existence. I can't think about existence and not exist. It's self-refuting. But I don't think I'm presupposing anything there. I'm not presupposing language. I use language, and sometimes it works and sometimes it fails. So, yeah, I don't see that I'm presupposing anything in my worldview. Now, there are other atheists who will say that they are fine with that. I see no reason to accept the idea that I'm presupposing anything. On the other hand, I'm also not certain of anything other than that I exist. I just have what I would say is justified belief, given the available tools and evidence that I'm presented by. Yeah. I hope that makes sense. I'll answer a couple more questions here. I can't believe it's been going on for an hour. So, any other questions for me before I? So let me post this. One expression of materialistic mechanistic presup may be like the expectation that gravity continues to work moment to moment. It's just the way we can move forward making predictions. So, but I don't think, as a materialist, I don't think I'm presupposing that it will continue to work. I'm observing that it works, but while being perfectly aware of the problem of induction. Like, it could be very well the case that at some point it will not work. That I'll wake up the next day and the sun won't rise. But I don't think I'm presupposing that it will. I have a reasoned belief given past experience, but I don't have certainty that it will. So a philosopher told me that belief is stochastically involuntary. Our mind already assumes something, and we are not even conscious of it. It is not in our choice. Do you agree? So I agree and disagree. I agree in the sense that, yeah, it's true that we have intuitions that are just kind of ingrained in us. They're just there. And so that, to some extent, may shape our beliefs. But that, I think, is the point of philosophy, is to kind of try to get to whether or not our intuitions can withstand self-introspection and analysis. And I think philosophy and science do a lot of work to actually show why some of our intuitions don't hold up. So even if we assume something is true, through the work and the deconstruction of philosophy and science, we can kind of arrive at, okay, maybe this belief is sensible to keep, while this belief is not sensible to keep. I would say I'm an agnostic on most questions. I have my intuitions and I have the perspectives that I think are the most sensible. But I certainly don't claim knowledge that they're true. I just say that this is what I think is the most reasonable given our situation. So it's, and I think you sent me a paper on this once before, where you say you'd have to presuppose that error is possible. If the judgment there is such a thing as error is true, then there is error. But it is false, then the judgment is in itself an error. I got to think about that. I'm not sure that I agree. Because couldn't the observation of error arise from just experience? Like if I have the assumption that it's always going to be sunny, because I've never experienced anything otherwise, and then I wake up and I see that it's raining, and I've never had that experience before. It seems to me that it's not that I'm presupposing anything. Is that it is kind of contained in the experience that something happened that I wasn't expecting. I think there's a difference. Another thing I should say is I think there's a difference between presupposed and what's the word I'm looking for? Inherent. Presupposed and what is a better word? I can't think of it at the moment, but I hope that makes sense. I mean, I do get what you're saying. I just don't think that the term presupposition is correct here. I wish I could remember the term I'm thinking of. I'm sure as soon as I end the stream, I'll remember which one it is. But yeah. Sometimes being bilingual, instead of thinking of words in two languages, it results in you not being able to think of the word in either. But I mean, the point being is that there are certain things that I think are kind of ingrained in us. Some think that the language is that way. I don't know if I agree with that, but maybe, hopefully you guys know the word I'm thinking of, what I'm referring to. Any last questions before I end this Q&A? My primary language is not English, it's Italian. So I'm originally from Italy. English is my second language. Although I probably speak more English now. So let me address this question. Even if you present evidence to me, I need to presuppose that my senses are generally okay to evaluate it correct. So again, I don't know that am I presupposing that my senses are generally okay, or am I observing that they're working? Like even my acknowledgement that my senses can fail sometimes arise from the observation that they can also succeed. I'm not sure that, like, if I want to see if a pen works, and I pick up a pen and I write on the paper, am I presupposing anything there, or am I just seeing whether or not the tool works? Now, it would be different if the person you're talking to is assuming that their sense is always going to work perfectly. But I don't. I do think there are limitations in ways in which our senses have been shown to fail. I just don't know that means that we're presupposing our senses, because we have certain kind of ways to test whether or not those senses are dependable. Yes, I agree that we are using our senses to observe that they work. I don't think that's a presupposition, though. I think that's just a fact. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate the questions and you joining me today. I'm hoping that I'm making some sense here. I'm not particularly good at responding on the spot, but I'm trying to get better at engaging on that level. Hey guys, thanks again. I think I'll probably end it there for the time being, but stay tuned. We should have a Patreon up and running probably tomorrow, the day after, and hopefully Mike can join us again next time around. I think next time we'll be talking about the Icarus. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but the miracles relating to what was it? The body of Christ turning into blood and that kind of thing. So thank you all for joining us. Maybe I think the next time will be around. Well, I'll try to do an episode in a couple of days, if possible. But with that said, thanks again, and we'll be back sometime soon. So, thank you. Have a good night and stay safe.